Hello, hello. This is Brave New History. We're here with Gnostic Quran
Yeah,
from the famed YouTube channel of the same name, Gnostic Quran. So, if people need to pause real quick and subscribe to his channel, that is just fine. And yeah, thanks for coming on.
yeah, welcome.
And so today we'll be talking about those mysterious letters that
Yeah,
a lot of the chapters of the Quran have that.
begins with this mysterious letters, which is also called in the Muslim theology as hurufi muqata'at or al-huruf al-muqata'at, because this kind of first notion is more, I would say, Persian reading of this word combination. They appear in the 29 chapters of the Quranic texts, or surahs, as you can say it otherwise. And this is like the small representation how it appears, that the 13 times it appears with this alif lam preposition, 4 times with a ta, 7 times with a ha mim, and there's like once with a different word combination, as you can see on the right side of the screen. And also I should notice that most of the times they do appear in the so-called Meccan surahs, and this is just the name for this earliest Quranic materials, at least in the like Muslim tradition, because as a Western critical scholar, you can disagree with this dichotomy that maybe there weren't even the case with the Quranic text, that there's like this distinction. But at least we can see that the Meccan surahs, they're more poetic, whilst the opposite one, the more later one, surahs, or the Medinan surahs, are more prosaic in their nature. And there's a whole lot of theories going on, both in Western Muslim literature, about the nature of these letters, and the most popular ones are the abbreviation theories, which just simply states that probably these letters are just abbreviation of some catchphrases in Arabic, or maybe in some different languages. And the first popular one, and it was precisely more popular in the Muslim writings and tradition, that the letters just the abbreviation of the gods' names. So the Alif Lam Mim, for example, is combination which the most prominent one could be translated as Allah Al-Latif Al-Majid. So the Alif would stand for the name of God itself, Allah, and Lam Mim for the adjectives in that sense, Al-Latif Al-Majid, like the kind one and the mighty one. Nur, Nun, Arabic letter Nun, for example, will stands for the An-Nur, the God is the light, and so on. Of course, I highly disagree with this attempts of medieval Muslim writers, and because of the arbitrary nature of this approach. Because sometimes Hadith will say one thing about the same letter combination we can find, and in other hadith tradition, of course, there would be like a different interpretation, and the whole idea doesn't explain why the letter Aleph appears only in some places. So this word combinations in Arabic, this huruf muqata'at, are different in nature. For example, as you can see on the right side of the screen, there is only one letter combination. For example, qaf, nun, sad. So this alif lam, which on the left side, it doesn't appear with the sad, nun, qaf, of like solitude letters, and one would expect to see that if it's really like the names of God. Why would the like the God's name itself, and we can speculate whether it's just the God's name, Allah, or simply the term for God, does not appear with a qaf, with the letter qaf, with the letter nun. So that's just part of inconsistency of this particular method, and I think that's just, to be fair, just opposite guess games, which were ended up being codified within the corpus of the Hadith traditions.
Yeah. Well, and along those lines, it's why are we describing Allah in those terms,
Yeah,
right? Like, it doesn't have anything to do with the content of the chapter, or it's just,
yeah, it's
and
just
like, it
it.
can't just be starting Bismillah. We have to come up with
Yeah,
a
exactly.
name for God, and then we're gonna,
Use again Bismillah, which
and then
reiterates the names.
in a
Although,
way nobody understands too, just for kicks, and just, I mean, the people that say it's known only to God,
yeah, but
then why would he write it? Why would he keep the book to himself if it's like God's diary and it's just for him?
yeah,
Why would he share it with us if it's not to make any sense?
yeah, but
Then,
then, like in Shia traditions, when they actually say this, oh, this is the just for the God to understand, they just simply mean that is for the imams to understand, because the imamhood will come from the God himself. So, like this kind of secretive tradition, secretive understanding will remain with this higher profile imams, whilst the ordinary Muslims, they are not allowed to even think about this stuff. Like they don't have a right to interpretation. Yeah, the second ideas which you can find in Muslim literature, that this letters represents the alerting devices for the foreign audience, and actually it's not some controversial stuff, for example, which Christoph Luxemburg proposes, and we will discuss him later, of course, about the borrowings from other languages. There are some hadith, famous hadith tradition, which goes to Ibn Abbas, where he states that actually Taha, that's one of the combinations, is from Syriac, meaning "old man," even though like you won't find anything like that like that in Syriac literature. But it's a good attempt to explain this combination, which is non-Arabic in the sense, like every Arab, you would at least try to enclose this combination within Arabic language to think that maybe it's just Arabic words, but you won't find anything like that in Arabic. And this is for the combination Taha, and also the combination for Yasin, which some tradition identified with the Abyssinian or Ethiopic language, which there supposedly used for the Ya insan. So again, there's like a lot of doubt about whether it was an original Ethiopic language or just guessworks of the interpretation when they just try to pull out these things out of thin air. But yeah, this kind of interpretation back in the day found its hate resistant, like fierce resistance among the theologian classes, and there was whole language battles within like Mu'tazila tradition and other non-orthodox one. But I just pull this up in the presentation to say that it wasn't controversial back in the medieval day to say that Arabic, or at least some Arabic parts, supposed Arabic parts in the Quran, were borrowed from non-Arabic sources. And interesting that they use a Syriac and Ethiopic, which precisely the most prominent language, like the long borrowers, you could find in Arabic. Like the Syriac would be like the first language to pop up with the similarities you have, and Ethiopic would be the third one after the Hebrew. So yeah. Oh, and the presentation is just
Yeah. Well, here one point that so you said that it wasn't controversial to say
yeah
that the Quran borrowed from other sources early on.
yeah.
Now, doesn't that kind of go against what it says in the Quran that it was written in Arabic and there's no foreign parts to it?
لسان العربي المبين, as it states. Well, you can interpret that, but maybe it was just a part of the Quranic materials which this particular verse referring to. But for me, this verse exclusively gives a hint that the audience which was addressed to was an Arabic audience, and this kind of site from which Quran came from is not Arabic, because otherwise it wouldn't make any sense why to clarify this stuff. But yeah, fortunately, like this presentation crack up in the Steam yard. But the second hypothesis is the Western approach. There's different ones, but I just pull up the Luxembourg because he's just famous nowadays. And Luxembourg presents the idea that letters actually comes from the Syriac liturgical text. And for example, Luxembourg believes that Arabic Aleph Lam Mim represents the Syriac Aleph Lamad Mim. And originally there was a Syriac script, but I don't know, it just broke up for some reason. But it stands for the Emar li Maria in Syriac, which in Arabic would sound like the Qala li Rab, the Lord spoke to me. And you actually can find this in the Syriac version of the Peshitta in Isaiah, where this particular word combination appears, and I just highlighted that in the presentation. That exactly, you can Google it, you will find it. Thus the Lord said to me or spoke to me, and this phrase is used, Marli Maria. Secondly, he says that, for example, Arabic Taha comes from the Syriac Tabhu, which correspond to the Arabic Tayyibun Huwa, the Lord is good. And you can also find it in the Psalm, in the Peshitta version of the Psalm, the Syriac version of the Psalm, Old Testament literature. Also, he states that Aleph Mim Saad combination probably came from Emarli Maria Sabaut. It's very similar to the first one, but with the addition of the Tzadi, with the Syriac letter Tzadi, which stands for the Sabaut, would be similar to Qala li Rabb Sabaut in the Arabic. The mighty or strong Lord spoke to me. Yeah, and this is like the the Marcion Old Testament evil creator speaking here. Like, they shall die by the sword, and their children and their daughters shall die in famine. And you can find it in Jeremiah. Kef HaYain Sot, he identified with a Syriac, which stands for the Kabir Huwa Rob Aliyah Sabaut in Arabic. But I personally couldn't find anything like that in Syriac literature, so I guess I just straight away hypothesis, like it's very hypothetical. Even Christoph Luxemburg himself in his article, which the name you can see on the screen, he doesn't provide any reference, unfortunately, to where he pulled up these phrases. So I tried to search for this particular one. Maybe there's some Syriac literature, but it's not clear in his article, unfortunately. And yeah, we will follow with a second type of theories, which is non-abbreviation one. We discussed this idea that maybe it came down from the Syriac, but now we will discuss more profane, I would say, ideas, because they would try to not to see this kind of word combination as some catchphrases, but rather maybe some identification of scribes or chapters or something like that. And the oldest attempt was done by Theodor Noldeke. That this idea is one of the oldest in the Western literature, and he believed that basically this words are monograms or the initials for the individuals who basically compiled the Quranic materials we have today. And for example, he gives an example sort of for the tautology that the Alif Lam Ra was initially Alif Lam Zain, but as you can see, this letter Ra is very similar to Zain, just distinguished by one dot, and this dot, for some reason, or maybe some scribe error, or maybe intentionally, was dropped, and it was stood for the Alif Lam Zain, which is the initial of one of the compilers, Az-Zubair. And there's this kind of correspondence, how he perceived this, like how he corresponds the letters with the names of the scribes or the prominent figures who were responsible for the codification of the Quran. For example, Sa'd for the Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas, or Ain for the Umar, or maybe for Ali, or something like that. The main problem, of course, that it doesn't correspond quite with all the scribes we have in the classical Muslim historiography, but we can ignore that, of course. But the selection of the letters is too very arbitrary. For example, Kaf stated for the Abu Bakr, but you would expect the first letters of his names, like Alif Ba, not the Kaf. And Kaf simply, as far as I know, doesn't correspond with any of the scribes. Like you won't find any scribes with a name starting with the letter Kaf. So also this problem of the Alif Lam, that it appears only for some scribes, for the Zubair, for example, Alif Lam Zain, or Alif Lam Mim for the Mughira. But it doesn't follow, for example, Kaf, Nun. This letter is presented solely in the text, so that's strange too. And as far as I know, Theodor Nöldeke himself abandoned this idea in his later works. And he abandoned it, responding to the Ortho-Luth idea that maybe it represents some sort of numerology akin the Jewish gematria, that, for example, in Semitic languages, the like alphabetic letters corresponds with a numerical value to these letters, and this was present in the 7th century Arabic, at least, because they were not using Indian numerals. They were adopted much later on, in 9th century, by I don't remember, but as far as I remember, it was the Al-Khwarizmi who was the first to invent this kind of Indian numerical system, and he was prominent mathematician, and he lived close to India in the Khwarezm. So yeah, and there's some of the tradition in the Suiti book which state that actually there were some Jews who would pick up the Quranic text and would see these letters and say, "Oh, this is actually the gematria. Like you can combine it together and get the numbers." And in that case, the Alif Lam Mim would correspond to 71 years, which the Islam would last, according to these Jews. But the problem is that such interpretation may serve the basis for the sum combinations, but other combinations, for example, kaf, ha, ya, ain, sod, in this combination, the order of summation is broken. So one would expect to see that the progressive order, like ha, ya, kaf, ain, sod. But here, as you can see, kaf stands for the 20, and the next one is 5, the lesser one. And that's not the practice of gematria. That wasn't the practice back in the day in the Aramaic-speaking communities. Well, you can say that there were no such convention in Arabic, for example. They would just pick and choose the letters, but yeah, it's just very strange that they would not follow the Semitic languages in that style. Another non-abbreviation theories states that the letter stands for the abjad sequence, the sequence of the alphabetic of the Semitic alphabet you can find in other Semitic languages, and it was proposed by Devon J. Stewart, the professor in Arabic language, and he noticed, for example, that the last 6 letters of the standard Arabic alphabet, they are absent in this word combination we can find in the current Quranic text, namely tha, ha, dhal, dod, dha, and ghain. They are not used in the mysterious letters. And he estimated, like he made like some estimation about the 11 in 1 billion, that the probability of this happening. And the absence of this last 6 letter very convincingly reflects the Aramaic style or the Hebrew style, where this particular sounds, which you can find in Arabic, are simply absent. And consequently, it gives reason to wonder about the Luxembourg hypothesis. Maybe there's some truth behind it, or at least what the Quranic compilers used was some Aramaic writings. But yeah, because the probability is very low that it wouldn't appear at least some one of the 6 letter would appear in these combinations. And
so with this, we're saying that these letters appear in Arabic, and then the parallel languages, they don't appear.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? And then so being that they're absent might give us reason to believe that that's coming from some foreign material or some foreign language.
Yeah, from some not foreign, parallel Semitic language, either, I don't know, Nabatean, Aramaic, or maybe Hebrew, or maybe Syriac, in the case of the Christoph Luxembourg hypothesis. And I think it's very, very damn convincing, especially the estimation he gives. Like, it's 11 in 1 billion. It's, yeah.
That seems high.
Yeah, that seems.
I mean, that's like, I don't know, like if you're just taking letters at random, the chances of missing the last few letters
are very low.
But I mean, like, that 1 billion is a lot. That might be overstating the case. I mean, not knowing anything about it, it just doesn't. I don't know. But I mean, it's a convincing argument. But I mean, just fishing letters out at random. The chances that you're going to pull like 50 A's, for example.
Yeah.
I don't think that's 1 in 11 billion. I think it's, you know what I mean? But I don't know. But yeah.
As far as I know, his calculation is very simplified. Like, maybe we need to notice some other facts which can change this estimation, but I don't know. And he actually, the critique of this would be, of course, that some letters are just simply absent, which is sequential. For example, ba, the second letter of the Arabic, is not present in the in the sequences. So, but it's worth noting that Muqata'at, this combinations, displays all possible forms of skeletal text, that the so-called Rasmic text, and due to the fact that in early manuscripts the dots are placed chaotically without any internal consistency, which probably that testifies the idea that early on Quran was used as some personal property for some scribes, because it would be only good explanation for this notion, that maybe they held this idea that one skeletal representation can contain within itself many different letters. So because Ba, Ya, Nun, you can distinguish one from another without the dot. Either there would be one dot above or two below, and maybe that was the idea. And recently I found out in the article of the Daniel Beck in the Academia of the Manichaean, or possible Manichaean connection, because if you pick up the argument about this notion that maybe they would borrow from non-Arabic sources, from Aramaic, for example, or Syriac, that would make perfect sense, because, for example, Christoph Luxemburg proposed like Syriac liturgy, in that sense, Syriac Orthodox Church, but Syriac was used extensively not only by the Orthodoxy but by Manichaeans themselves. Mani himself, most of his writings originally were written in Syriac, some in Parthian, like for example Shaburagan, his main work or major work, but his gospel, Mani's gospel, was written in Syriac, and it was divided in the 22 chapter corresponding to the Syriac alphabet. And Syriac was basically the lingua franca before Islam, I would say, because it was used by Marcionites, it was used by like non-Orthodox form of Christianity, by the Nestorians, by several Gnostic schools. So the idea is about this Manichaean provenance that, and this is just to testify the claim that the Mani's gospel was divided in 22 chapters, and this is from the Biruni account, from the books of John Reeves, who exactly studies Manichaean manuscripts. And this book I personally recommend, because there's a lot of, I would say, heresiological account combined together about the Mani himself from Western and Eastern sources. And what is striking, we can find in the Turfan manuscripts in Parthian and Middle Persian languages, that the fragment we find referencing to the chapters. For example, in this particular fragment, it states that he teaches Aleph of Gospels, and we can think that this he refers to the Mani himself, but it may be that this pronoun refers to the fragment which the phrase appears, and this fragment exactly, this M17, and the reference to the fragment would testify the idea that maybe it was used for the priest, so he would understand that that the whole this fragment will be talking about. If it refers to the chapter Aleph in that sense, he would be familiar with the Gospel of Mani, and he would understand, oh well, this fragment will talk about what in the first chapter of the Gospel of Mani, which at least demarcated by this Syriac Aleph. And could it be that Quran in that case follows such a paradigm, so that the combinations are referring to the Gospel of Mani, or maybe other gospel tradition, which borrows the similar convention of demarcating the fragments as the reference for the specific gospel in that case, because we have the same, basically the same with the Turfanic manuscripts, because they serve as a liturgy, exactly like the Meccan surahs of the Quran, if you really see them as a poetic one, because, well, poetry in religion is just simply liturgy. So maybe, but this is just my attempt to reconstruct it. By the Daniel Beck, he noticed that the letters were abbreviations. They were not standing for the chapters, because, for example, and this is the reconstruction to the audience who will look in our discussion, because we don't have, unfortunately, the materials, the original materials of the Gospel of Money. We only have the reconstruction, like akin to the Marcion Gospel, from the heresiological reports. We don't have the materials. And he actually quotes one of the scholars that says that that original Syriac may starts with this phrase ani mani, and in Syriac it would be aleph mim, and the Syriac pronoun would have been abbreviated later on by the scribes with the aleph. So that could be the origins of this huruf al-muqaat in that sense, but still need to be investigated, because, for example, in the Quran we don't find the aleph mim, we find aleph lam mim, but I could see, like, for example, how ha mim could be the hiya mani in Syriac, the living mani, and this ha mim appears several times in the Quranic text, but other combination I'm not so sure about. But maybe there was this kind of idea of abbreviating this kind of original phrases of money, like to demarcate the text, basically. Like, but yeah, it's just the speculation in most of the times, because unfortunately, sadly, we don't have any material evidence to check this theory. And that's pretty much the end of my presentation for today.
Yeah. So the Manichaean one, that's saying, like, within the Quran, we're referencing different chapters in the Manichaean gospel.
Yeah, maybe.
And so
that's my basically idea, that Aleph Lam Mim would be like the first chapter, Aleph Lam. Oh, I don't remember what the number of the letter, but you can pick up the idea that the Aleph Lam Mim would just reference to the 3 chapters from the particular gospel, and what stresses this fact that in the huruf al-muqatat we don't find the repeating letters. So you don't find, for example, alif alif or ba repeating itself, and that would make sense if it refers to the chapters. Why would they repeat the reference to the chapter itself? But I don't know, this particular idea was, and this is not actually like his main idea in his paper of the Daniel Beck, because he gives another explanation, but more akin the Muslim tradition, when he tried to correspond these letters with some phrases, but within the Quranic text itself. But I don't know. If you look outside the sources, I think that's the most, for me at least, the most plausible one.
Is the Manichaean one?
Manichaean, or maybe some other gospel tradition, who knows? And it's also what also solidifies that hypothesis is that most of them used in the Meccan surahs, which are much more poetic, and this poetic notion was like, I would say, was the basis of the Manichaean scripture, because they would sing them. back in the day. And Mani himself often represented as a singer, as the one who would sing in the courts of the Sasanian kings. So I don't know.
Yeah.
What's your idea about that? I think you back in the day said that the
Yeah.
idea of the initials the most convincing one for you.
Yeah. How it corresponds to the people that we know. And I mean, that we know compiled it, or I guess not that we know, but tradition holds that
Mm-hmm.
compiled it. And seeing that list there of people that the
Yeah,
tradition says compiled it, and we can correspond it. I mean, but then with taking a little bit of liberty on their abbreviations,
yeah, liberty, exactly.
um,
It may
it's
like, but
yeah, and
first and foremost, we don't know that this kind of Abbasid convention about the names of the companions are really the same names we have in the real life. It's maybe
mhm,
just the name were different of the scribes. We don't.
yeah. Under
And
this, you would think that maybe they're retrofitting it, that they see the mysterious letters and then retrofit it to
yeah,
be the names of the compilers, which
yeah,
seems unlikely that you would go to that length to do that, but stranger things have happened. But
yeah.
I mean, but even with that, is just that the tradition, we can regard it with some skepticism. It's
Mhm,
interesting that it corresponds so tightly to this,
mhm,
right? And then we wouldn't expect it to be like after all that time to be accurate, right? That, myth creeps in and all that, but being that it holds so tightly to the tradition
mhm,
and it corresponds to the letters, kind of gives a reason to think that maybe there's something to this. But at the same time, the Manichaean idea,
yeah,
is pretty convincing at the same time. I mean, it's just like with true crime, right? Like the Zodiac, if you're familiar with the Zodiac killer,
yeah,
there's so many theories that can convince you like this guy has to be it. Like he was there on that day, he was a total weirdo, and this and that. But then
yeah.
you can do the same thing for five other people that you say, well, it has to be that. You build a case that's all circumstance based, right? But it can't be all of them, right? Like it can't like one of them, like coincidences happen, right? So which makes it a little bit tough.
Yeah, I would say that the mysterious letter are still very mysterious to this day, because you can pull up whatever, and I presented like just small amount of hypothesis. I
Yeah,
guess there's a lot of more, at least in contemporary Arabic literature, I would guess. And
yeah,
even the Christoph Luxemburg himself, he actually has the YouTube channel. You can find him, but it's in Arabic. But if you know Arabic, you can closely examine his claims. But yeah, but you can defend this idea, this particular of the scribes' initials, with the idea that maybe the original names of the scribes were not exactly the same as the Abbasid historiography present them, and we don't have any material evidence for the Abu Bakr, for the Uthman, for the Ali, basically nothing, not even coins minted in their name. So, but some people in the history in like this classical Muslim historiography, they do appear on the inscriptions, like the Muawiyah or Abd al-Malik ibn Marwan, for example. They're
mhm,
everywhere. But it's very strange that like prominent companions of the
yeah,
Prophet, they just completely blotted out of the history. Like it's almost they never was here to begin with. So
yeah. And Robert Spencer points that out about Uthman, and he was supposed to be the compiler of the Quran, right?
mhm,
And but then at the same time, every caliph we've ever had is said to have been the compiler of the Quran, right? Like the all of the caliphs, they have a quote of them saying that I compiled the Quran, which
But the
makes it a little bit strange.
compilers, yeah, but they definitely their actions were responsible for the compilation of the Quran somehow. Maybe
Yeah. They
maybe
didn't
with the, like,
personally do
different
it. They just,
steps. Yeah, and the Shia tradition even today states that the 33 caliphs were just like they perversed the original Quran, and the real Quran was at hands of Ali, of the fourth caliph. So of course it's very big problem for this kind of 12 or Shiism nowadays, because it's very embarrassing when they're trying to defend uh, the idea that Quran was perfectly preserved. Even like I don't know where the hell this idea even came from. This kind of idea of the Quran perfectly preserved. Maybe some Hanbalis back at the day, not all of them believed in this stuff. But why now? It became like the mainstream idea. It's just mind blowing. It wasn't the mainstream idea for the most part of the Sunni Orthodoxy, for the Asharis. They didn't
yeah,
believe in that stuff. That's why they differentiate, for example, between this kind of written Quran and this
yeah,
Quran in the heavenly tablet.
yeah. I've heard on YouTube a mufti. He said the standard narrative has holes in it. I think
Uh,
that's Mufti.
Yasser Qad, yeah, as far as I
Yeah,
remember.
I'm just joking. He's not a, but I'm just being silly. But yeah, the whole preservation of the Quran. He's not a Mufti. I just made that up. But um,
I mean,
the
he's a
whole
Salafi Mufti, maybe, I don't know. He definitely ended up some madrasa system, uh, because, well, nobody would even able to get him any voice in the public space if
you
he wasn't under this kind of classical
yeah,
madrasa
that's true.
theology. And
Yeah,
so,
and then the whole idea, with uh, people point out of the perfect preservation of the Quran doesn't appear until the 1900s. It's a relatively late concept.
yeah, it's mostly comes from this kind of Quran only community, Quraniyun, where they just defend the idea that only Quran. It's like the Protestantism of Islam, like only scriptura, but in that sense, not only Bible, not the Bible only, but the Quran only. And of
Yeah.
course, if there's some differences, even though I just don't understand how you can reconcile the fact that, for example, the vowels or the diacritical marks are not presented in the early manuscripts. Like where do you get your readings of the specific verses? You get that from the Hadith, from the Abbasid traditions, and they are highly critical towards that. But at the same time, they just pick and choose. To be honest, it's
Yeah.
just like, oh, let's not take the Hadith stuff, but we will take the grammarian stuff. Even both of the Hadith scholars and grammarians, they worked basically for the same people back in the day. So
Mhm.
it's highly retarded, I would say. And
Yeah.
yes,
Well, there's only so far I think faith can take you that you would have to believe, like before the diacritical marks, that there is not only the perfect preservation, but the perfect reading. So everybody who read it read it
exactly.
perfectly. And
That
I mean,
because uh, it's not so prominent in European languages because vowels are just presented within the letter structure. But in Semitic languages, yeah, you can just you can't distinguish it without the diacritical marks or dots. And for example, the Dead Sea Scrolls, they do not contain any of the dotting system, or how's it called, Nikudim in the Hebrew, which were later on adopted within the Masoretic text tradition. So maybe it have like this kind of roots that, yeah, as you said, not only perfectly preserved, but perfect readings you must follow. And of course, within the Semitic languages, if you change up the diacritical marks, you change up the whole meaning. It's just upside down sometimes for some passages. You can't deny that. And this whole idea of ahruf kira'at, that there's like the 7 ahrufs, that there's 7 specific readings. Come on.
Yeah,
That's
well,
not,
I mean, with each different reading, you change it exponentially, right?
yeah.
So, I mean, there's going to be more than 7, right? If you like put this dot here, we're going to put the next
Yeah,
dot there,
exactly.
and it makes sense in context, but like there's going to be like
And
it's
even
going to be a very high number because you're each change yeah.
yeah, it's not 7 definitely, but this number, like, as far as I know, I don't know his name, but there was some theologian who came up with it, with the idea of the 7-1, and there were different theologian at his time who presented different like demarcation of this reading. Some came up with like 15, some came up with 100, and this 7-1 is just what later theologians accepted, basically, like, because it would correspond with their own theology, obviously, the specific reading. And yeah, this idea, I don't know how it's crept in, but it's sad to see that so invested to defend this idea, like many Sunni, even Shias. I wouldn't even think that Shia theologian would defend this stuff, because there's a whole lot of Shia like prominent figure in the past who would like write the books that Quran was changed. The title of the books would be would be spelled exactly like that on the changings within the Quran. And yeah, it's sad. Like, it's just this kind of, it's Protestant idea mostly, I think, that just came out from the Protestant Christianity, and for some reason pulled up by this Salafi movement nowadays. And now they're
Interesting.
like, everyone who denies that this dots corresponds what was in the Uthmani Quran is a kafir, is a mushrik, is outside of Islam. Because, well, that's the big problem. If you allow that to happen, like if you allow people to read Quran like without their critics, like if you just remove them and just present this text, read however you want, they can like came up with such different readings, such different interpretations, that the whole idea of the orthodoxy will crumble. Because, like, what's the point of, and of course, who gonna allow to do that? Because you need to preach specific type of theology within the madrasa system, within the kind of khutbahs or the Friday sermons, within the Jum'ah mosques or Jum'ah masjid, like this congregational mosques. And this is just a part of the policy. So, of course, like, so yeah. And when you remove this diacritics, like, yeah, of course, the whole idea of the Gnostic origin of the Quran pops off. I would say inevitably. And even with the current readings we have, you can see that this infancy gospels narrative within the Quranic text, like Apocryphon of John and several others. So how you can just jump around these facts, I don't know. But to me, just the denial of the text itself, like the whole idea that God spoke it, but for some reason God chooses this device, and by device I mean the book, which is written by the hands of man, not by the mystical hands of God. So it just, yeah, it's it's
Yeah.
very unconvincing.
Yeah. And you know, I've talked to people that say in religion's earliest days, the texts were among the least important part to it. That there was the
There was a stress for the oral tradition
yeah,
in most of
and
the
there's
cases.
often a mystery school surrounding it. I have no idea if that might be the case with Islam, like some kind of mystery school. But
Mm,
I mean, just keeping up the pattern with religions generally, then we would expect it, but I don't see any hint of it. But I don't, I'm, yeah, of course, no expert, right? But that, you know, I mean, like religious texts can be a little bit dry, and there's going to be something experiential to it. And the
mm,
texts were the least, but now that's the main part of it, right? And they can never, never, never change once they're canonized, right? So
mm.
it's a little, you
Yeah,
wonder.
you wonder about not only Islam in that case, but Judaism and Christianity, whether it's just the similar ideas reiterating itself within the different branches. And I don't know about the Buddhist tradition or Hinduism, but I think
Mhm.
similar stuff happened there, definitely. It's all about defending specific canon.
Yeah,
The problem with the Semitic language is because diacritics is not present within the skeletal text. That's I think the the the, the problem we are dealing with, and sometimes we just see this kind of idea that Gnostics are just perverse, like they would just perverse the scripture back in the day, but maybe they would just have different text, the different reading of the text of the Old Testament, for example. And, and that's quite evident with Marcion himself, that he would use the Torah extensively. So, or the Samaritans who held very different idea about what the Judaism is, comparing them to the rabbinical Judaism, for example. Even the Mount uh, on which the Moses received this kind of
mhm,
revelation is different for them, at least. And it's quite evident from the text of the Torah there was two mounts, not just single one. But yeah, it's just it opens the different interpretation, and obviously Orthodoxy doesn't want to deal with this fact
yeah,
because, well, if there's different ones, then it means that there is no like sole orthodox position around. Like there is no this kind of distinction, right, wrong. We orthodoxy and you are heretic, and it just basically undermines the whole idea of the church, of the apostolic succession. In that case, the same could you can see everywhere in every religion. And in Judaism, it would be succession to the Moses. In Islam, it would be succession to the Muhammad, and they need this Hadith tradition to prove that. Even though the succession from Muhammad towards like previous uh, prophet Jesus is not so clear, and different hadith about explaining that, oh, he was like Ishmaelite, he had like
mhm,
it's inevitably just the big question to even like unveil this. You can come up with so much different things. And but yeah, it's just I think this this is exactly the case for the mysterious letters. Maybe not all of the part of the Quran, but when you have this at the beginning, and all Muslim tradition is just guessing, basically,
mhm,
what the hell is this? You may wonder, was there any succession between the Quranic text and the so-called Muslim tradition? That's just the honest question. Why would you guess then? If there is succession, there would be no guessing. You would just simply know by the fact of the survived oral tradition. But it's not there, and it just
yeah,
gives so much doubt about whether the Abbasid project was not intentional or deliberate in the attempt to change what was originally there. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And then in terms of like other ideas for the mysterious letters, I've heard one that is somewhat convincing is simply that it talks about the contents of what's going to be in there. So, like, there's a nun where they're talking about the whale.
Or the noon, and there is, and within the surah, there's gonna be the discussion about the Yunus and
Mhm.
or Jonah in the biblical tradition, and that he was swallowed by the whale. Like, to be honest, and they would just straight out make this correspondence. That's noon, it means the fish, and the surah talks about the fish, so it may be connected. But yeah, like there's a big question whether the hut in the Quran is fish, because maybe in contemporary Arabic it really means the fish, but if you do compare it with the Aramaic, it's nothing like that. So yeah, there is such hypothesis that, and I think that's kind of Daniel Beck, who is I presented the last one. He exactly goes with this kind of notion, but I haven't presented it in the presentation because, well, you can came up with so many
Mhm.
different things with this stuff. Oh, Alif Lam Mim means that. Alif Lam Mim Sod means that. Of course, I'm not just denying it as unplausible, but
Yeah,
it's
there'd be so many ways to do it.
more
Yeah,
broader in a sense,
yeah,
because some guy will come up with one. It's like exactly in the Hadith tradition where they just guess.
yeah,
It's not that solid as the idea of the whether it's initials of the scribes. It's more restricted to the specific traditions within the Islam. So
yeah, yeah. So yeah, this Luxembourg thing, it's
yeah, and
too bad
actually,
his channel's in Arabic, right?
yeah,
Doesn't have any English. It'd be interesting to translate
yeah,
and comment on it.
there is a long one, like in 1 hour videos or something in his channels. Just
Yeah,
go on with the specific surahs and try to understand what is going on there. But yeah, he actually not only present this idea, this is just part of his article, but he also shows the correspondence within the Quranic manuscripts and Syriac liturgical texts, for example, that some demarcative, some like symbology which is used to distinguish between different chapters are very similar. That, for example, in Syriac text, that they will use like this 4 dots, and in early Quranic manuscripts, you will see exactly like that. So it can say that at least scribal convention of Quran is very similar to the Syriac text. Or, for example, he gives this examples of the abbreviation within the Syriac liturgical text at the beginning, but they actually stands for the numerology. So in that case, it's just the reference to the Old Testament psalm. So some Yasin would be like 16 in this convention, and in the Syriac literature, they would use the dash about this specific word combinations in Syriac to denote, like to alert the reader that this is just abbreviation. And similar we can find with not all of the cases, but with some cases within Quranic manuscripts. With this Alif Lam Mim, you will see the dash over the letter combination, and in Muslim tradition, just explain that it identifies the prolonged reading of this specific text, but well, can you believe the Muslim tradition? That's another question. So that would be not just simply Alif Lam Mim. You need to spell it Alif Lam Mim, like those, in a long fashion, in a prolonged fashion. So yeah, but some of the ideas of the Luxembourg I'm highly critical of, but you can't just simply deny the guy and like reject him or just pseudoscience, how many do today, because it's mostly apologetic, like this kind of this nervous laughing. This is just a pseudoscience. Whilst there's a lot of arguments behind it, similar we can see with orthodoxy idea about the Marcion gospel. It's the pseudoscience. Whilst there's several scholars in very well attested academia who propose that things, definitely not the pseudoscientists, like David Litva, for example, whose books used in the academia. So yeah, it's just apology games, as it often is.
Yeah. Yeah, very true. All right. Any other thoughts before we go, or any points that we didn't touch on?
Oh, no, I think we just discussed everything. If it could be about these letters, maybe some other times discuss some different topic.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So yeah, everybody watching, if you've heard of another idea or maybe something compelling, or you know for real what the mysterious letters are and you need to enlighten us, please leave a comment and enlighten us.
Critique
And
us.
How's that?
Critique us. We're open to every type of critique.
Yep. Absolutely. All right. Sounds good. We'll leave it there. Thank you, everybody, for watching. And thank you so much, Gnostic Quran, for coming on. Very interesting. Our favorite and mysterious topic, the mysterious letters.
Mysterious letters. Yeah. Till next time.
Yep. Absolutely. All right. Have fun, everybody.